Hello, welcome to the MR Runningpains podcast. This is Aaron Saft once again. And today I'm going to combine some questions I got from Kathleen from online. I appreciate her questions. I wish her well in her training. She's been trying to get back to some 5Ks, which is great to hear. So thank you again, Kathleen. So her first question, I'm just going to answer outright. And her second question, I'm going to answer in something that I actually had planned for this podcast. So her first question was, what should she be looking at on her watch when she's racing? Now, again, Kathleen is racing the 5K. So there's a few things here. The first thing I would say to all of you, not just you, Kathleen, but is to get to know the functions of your watch. What capabilities does your watch have? What can it track? How can it track it? How are you used to tracking things? So what are you trying to accomplish? By looking at your watch, are you trying to hit a certain pace, or are you trying to stay within a certain heart rate? So, it's these metrics that I would set up the watch face to show you deliberately. And maybe turn off the other metrics if you're not so concerned with them, so that your metric is the easiest to see. If we're looking at pace, there's a few different ways to do it. For my 5K runners, marathoners, it's great to see what you're going to hit for that mile, right? So what's the actual pace that you're going to hit for that mile? But for my ultra runners, you may be trying to hit an overall average pace, right? So let's take, for instance, if you're trying to do a 50 miler in, let's say, 10 hours. Now, you have it measured out as to, I need to be this pace averaging for the duration of the 50 miles. So you may want to change your watch to the average pace so that you can make sure you're on track, because that's going to change from mile to mile, especially if you're on a mountainous course or a single track trail. It's going to be different every mile. But if you're averaging that pace, at least you know how close you are to hitting your goal. If you're above it or below it, you know where to make adjustments. Whereas my 5K to marathoners, if you look and know, okay, yeah, you, especially for a 5K, because it's easier to do the math. If you're looking at your watch and seeing, where those splits are coming, about where you're on pace. Whereas in the marathon, it may get a little bit trickier to know, especially if you start slower, get faster, exactly where you're at, unless you're watching overall time and have benchmarks in your head or written down on your wrist. So, it might behoove marathoners to also put in that average pace. So you're not doing as many calculations. Now, that can be a little bit frustrating because you don't know exactly what pace you're hitting for that exact mile. So it's something that I would play with in training, is what I would suggest when you're doing your workouts, especially, the like mile repeats and such like that, or tempo runs. Tempo runs are a great place to kind of play with your watch and get to learn what's going to work best for you. Marathoners, if you're doing a long run with some marathon pace, for instance, great spot for that, either mile splits or average mile splits. So play with it, see what you think. And then, what I would say too, and this goes more for my ultra runners, I would say that, perhaps maybe you don't need those mile splits. Maybe you don't need that reminder every mile of where you're at. Sometimes it's nice just to not look at the watch, not worry about the watch, and you just turn off your alarm. It doesn't let you know when you've hit a mile. Maybe you turn on a nutrition alarm so that, you have a timer going off reminding you to take your nutrition, but maybe you don't need that mile reminder, especially if you're doing longer races. Not only will it save the battery, but it might save your mental capacity a bit more. You may be distracted by that alarm. Sometimes that alarm is very distracting, and that's mental energy. When you hear that alarm, I hit a mile, you look at your watch, you interpret the data. Again, all mental energy, all calories you're expending, and taking your focus off the primary goal of running and getting through this race. Sometimes it's a welcome distraction, but other times maybe it's not as needed. So consider that as well. And again, play with it on your long runs. See if you like that. just like sometimes, especially in the winter, I love just going for a run, turning off my alarms, and just having my long sleeve on so I can't see my watch, and just going for a run, not caring what mile I'm at, what time I'm at. That's to say, I still check just to make sure I'm hitting my nutrition, because I want to hit those specific intervals. I want to practice my intervals. So, it may behoove you again to put on a timer for your nutrition. But that said, sometimes it's nice just to go for a run and not hear those alarms. So play with it though. See what you think. So Kathleen, to your question, in a 5K, I think the biggest thing, if you're not worried about what heart rate you're at, is just to turn your pace and see, especially if you have a time goal, have that pace function right there. Other metrics that I might have up would probably be the overall time. So, where are you at? That way, again, you're not doing math in your head. You can kind of see, okay, at mile 2, I hit this, which averages out to whatever. So, you do a little bit of math, but having that overall time, so your elapsed time and your pace, I think those are the two basic ones that I would have up for a 5K. All right. The next piece of the podcast, I want to talk about your focus on training. And Kathleen had a very good question about, she felt sometimes overwhelmed, I think, by how much she's trying to get in, between the run itself, the workouts, strength training, mobility. So, a lot of this, I'm going to encompass a lot in this next piece. So have patience. If this brings up questions for you, or Kathleen, if it brings up more questions for you, please, let me know. But I'm going to try to expound as much as I can on these topics. I kind of made, let's see, 4 bullet points that I kind of want to cover, and there's actually sub points within each. So I'm going to try to go through them and be as thorough as I can. But, again, limited on time here, and I'm not trying to get too specific with each of these, but maybe give you a better understanding of what I look at for the overall picture of training. And then you can get more specific. And again, I've gone into more specific aspects of training in previous podcasts. So just go back into the archives and you can dip into some of these things. Okay. So the first thing I'll say, and when we look at training and we have a training block, I like to break it up into phases. Okay. Some coaches work, very mixed systems. I like to look at systems as a whole, kind of as a Arthur Lydiard approach, having phases working on specific functions for maximizing or bettering your specific fitness in a specific system to the body. And I'll give examples here. But, when we start out, when we first getting back to fitness, just like I am right now, when we're getting back to fitness, we have this base phase, right? We've got the base aerobic phase where you're just going out for simple, easy zone 2, zone 3 heart rate, 4 to 6 RPE runs, right? Some may say 4 to 5 RPE runs. But again, zone 2, zone 3, that's kind of where you're staying in this kind of base phase. Now there's some things that you can add in that will add in some higher zones and stuff like that, but you want to stay within that aerobic capacity. Okay. So that's, being intentional about creating that aerobic base, again, building your cardiovascular system. You can start throwing in strides, and I'm going to talk more about strides here in a little bit. But having the intention of that phase, knowing exactly what you're supposed to be doing in that phase and sticking to what that phase is suggesting and the purpose of that phase. Then it just depends on your race. When we talk about specificity of a race, we want to be more intentional or specific with our training as we get closer to the race. So if you're training for a 5K, your next phase may be longer intervals, lactate threshold intervals, in which you go up to 85% of maximum heart rate. You're doing longer tempo type intervals or tempo runs. This is that where we're trying to increase our capacity to run at a faster pace for a longer period of time. Okay, so those are the longer intervals, because in the 5K, we want more speed. So our focus is on speed and turnover. So then our next phase would be what we call short intervals, or some may call them max VO2 or anaerobic intervals, whatever they're termed. The shorter, faster intervals would be closer to the 5K because we're being more intentional about the specificity of the event, right? That's more specific to the 5K. So, but we're focusing on a specific system. Now we're focusing on 90% maximum heart rate. We don't want to get much above that. Our heart will in these intervals, because they are so hard, and at the end of the workout, we'll get some cardiac drift. So we'll probably get above that capacity, but that's what we're working on. Whereas in long intervals, we were working on the lactate threshold. And it's not to say that these systems don't cross. You don't work on other systems at the same time that you're working on these, but we're trying to be specific and intentional about what we're doing in the training phases. So that's what I mean by having intention of the phase. Now, why do we do that? That's my next point. And that's because we want variation of paces and efforts. If we can grow, we can improve as runners if we, as a lot of maybe some of the Swedish training that we're hearing about is this low zone 2 training. Maffetone was a big advocate for this low zone 2 zone 2, low zone 3, we'll say. 4 to 5 RPE, staying there and not doing much else, maybe some short strides. And again, I'm going to really get into a little deeper dive on the strides because I keep mentioning them. So, but I'm going to talk about them here pretty soon. But we want variation, and that's what's going to give us the most improvement. And that's why I talked about the lactate intervals, the max VO2 intervals. We want the intention of improving these systems because it's going to improve our overall fitness. I've had arguments as to should ultra runners include max VO2 workouts within their training. So when I did my Arthur Lydiard training for my coaching certifications, the Arthur Lydiard Foundation was actually pretty divided on this topic. I had one discussion with one gentleman who was teaching, a course that I was taking, and then I had a completely different conversation with another gentleman who was teaching another course that I was teaching. The reason I include max VO2 in many of my runners is not to say all of my ultra runners. It depends on my purpose and my intention as to why I'm including these max VO2. But if we can increase our fitness ceiling, which is what we talk about when we're discussing maximum VO2. So we have, let's just call it this glass ceiling that we start with. If I am to include max VO2 intervals early on in our ultra runners training, now again, this is least specific to an ultra runner, right? We don't really get into much max VO2 when we're racing an ultra, so it is least specific. So we keep it furthest away from the race date. But if I can increase their fitness, if I can break that glass ceiling and get above that glass ceiling and increase this person's fitness, I believe that's a tremendous benefit to the athlete. And that's why I include max VO2 intervals. Okay. So creating this variance can increase fitness and the person's capacity and ability to race better, to be a better athlete. And that's why I say create variance in your training. There are 4 important runs in any phase. Okay. Whether it be in base, be it in long intervals, be it in short intervals, in the taper even. There are 4 runs, 4 workouts, I'll call them. Okay. They're not specifically workouts, but 4 specific things that you should do in every phase. And that's what helps create the variation. The one is your workout. What is the workout intention? In the base phase, it may be a fartlek. It may be a short progression run. It can be some strides. Okay. But the second one would be strides. Strides should be included throughout. And here's where I begin to talk about strides. Okay. So, knowing that, your strides are super important throughout. So, I'm going to take a moment here and kind of just take a deeper dive into strides, because I believe this is important to talk about. I did a whole podcast for my Patreon supporters. And I'm not going to do the deepest dive as I did with them. They got a private episode about strides and the topic I'm about to talk to. So, but there are two different things that we work on with strides. For the most part, if you are doing 15 seconds or higher, you are working on speed endurance. You are working on your capacity to sustain that speed for a longer period of time. That makes you faster in some regards. But if we want to increase our overall speed, our top end speed, we need to be doing intervals that are shorter, 8 to 10 seconds. Okay. If you're doing intervals that are 8 to 10 seconds, you are now working on your true capacity to go faster. That is actual speed. Okay. You want full recovery in either regard, but there's two very distinct things here. So again, if you're doing 15 seconds or more, you're working on speed endurance, not necessarily your turnover to go necessarily faster. If you want that, you should be doing much shorter intervals, 8 to 10 seconds at max speed. That's the difference. At 15 seconds, you're at about 90 to 95% of maximum speed. Okay, so you've already diminished that potential to increase your turnover. Okay, again, it's going to work some, but to receive the maximum benefit, you're going 8 to 10 seconds at 100%. Now you have to be real careful with this. Be super careful if you're going 100%, right? Because you want to make sure your form is good, right? Your muscles can take it, because this is a high propensity for injury. So be very careful. I can't stress that enough. Be very careful if you're trying to do 8 to 10 seconds at maximum speed. Make sure your body's ready for it. Make sure you have the mobility, the strength, and the form to be able to do it. Okay. So very distinct difference there. But that would be the second workout, is your strides. So first being whatever workout you may be doing, intervals, tempo runs, that all those. Okay, that's your workouts. 2 is strides. 3 is your medium long run. Okay. The medium long run, I did a whole podcast episode about. So dive back, and I'll try to put that in the show notes. But the medium long run, I believe, is quintessential to any program. You're getting extra volume, extra aerobic capacity, a million different benefits to the medium long run. And I'm going to touch back on the medium long run a little bit. So number 3, medium long run. Number 4 is your long run. Okay. The long run, obviously, usually a staple to every week. Those others are what we need to make sure we're including to create this variation in the training. Okay. Everybody loves their long run. Well, most people love their long run. So keep in mind that those 4 components should be throughout any phase of training. You should have all 4 of those: the workout, strides, medium long run, and long run. Okay. The reason that we do that is that our body gets stagnant in multiple ways. Okay. So if I were to run at lactate threshold all the time, or do lactate thresholds for multiple weeks, trying to get up to, let's just say I tried it for 8 weeks, probably around week 5, maybe 6 at most, I'm going to start getting stagnant. I'm not going to notice much improvement. I'm not getting any more benefits from that, because my body's just plateaued. It's like, I need a new stimulus. You've already done this for long enough. I've gotten everything I can out of this stimulus. I need change. And that's when you change to a different phase of training. That's when you work a different system, is when you plateau, when you stagnate. Okay. So recognize when that happens. Know what your body's telling you. Okay. Also, fatigue levels. You're going to get more fatigued by doing shorter, max VO2 intervals. So pay attention to that. Know if you are feeling exhausted, tired, because if that's the case, again, the propensity for injury increases. You're getting higher risk. You're doing a lot to your body by doing these intervals. So make sure you're recovering from them. And that's the other days. We talked about the 4 key components to include in this, but recovery is also huge, whether that be a day off, whether it be cross training, whether it's just a simple jog. And again, when I say simple jog, you're talking about just a shakeout, like zone 2, really easy jogging. Okay. I heard a podcast today where they say it was like tripping over themselves. Easy. Okay. So go super light. And I'm not saying that we're not all these stick to it, rigid guidelines. I can't, move away from this structured calendar that I have in front of me. You have to do what's best for your body. And that's also stating that if you have a workout scheduled for that day and your body's telling you it's too tired, move it to a different day. Move it to a day when you're feeling better. Okay. And then vice versa. If you're feeling really good and you have a workout scheduled for the next day, maybe slide that, if you know the workout, slide that workout up to that day. Because if you're feeling that good, let it rip. Get into that workout. So it goes both ways. All right. The next bullet point that I'm going to talk about, I don't want it to come off wrong because the component it's huge, but I think at overtimes we overemphasize it, and that's the long run. I think too many people focus on the long run as the key component to their training. Okay. They look at, I only did this much of a long run. I only got up to this much of a long run. It's always, they're looking for this magic number that's going to make them succeed in a race. And I just want to put it out there that it's not always about the long runs. Okay. Look at the whole of your training, right? Look at everything you've done. And that's why I say create this variance in training. If you create the variance in training, you're doing so much more than just worrying about, like, did I get a certain amount of time in or a certain amount of miles in? This whole, however many weeks you've been training, if you got through 85% or more of it, you're going to be just fine. That's, your body's going to carry it through. Okay. It's an amazing, amazing thing. So be okay with, if you don't see whatever your magic number is. Let's say, I didn't get a 20 miler in for this marathon or whatever it may be. It's okay. Like, look at the rest of your training. Take faith in everything else that you've done. It's not as essential as, everything else. Okay. Because it's the whole of your training program that's going to give you success on race day, not just one long run or hitting a magic number is really what I want to make sure that I hit home with. Okay. There's a few things that I should touch on here. Okay. When we talk about increases in volume or mileage, the 10% rule, and everybody, most people have heard about the 10% rule, increasing your weekly volume by 10%, whether that be by time or whether that be by mileage. It is a safe rule of thumb. Okay. It is a safe way to build, because if you build too quickly, yes, you can get injured. If you build in that regard, it's sometimes you're not going to build enough volume. Okay. Because if you look at, starting at we usually start at a very diminished amount of either time or miles. And then if you increase that by 10%, you're not going to increase a lot over, even a long period of time. It would take a long time to get to the volume that your body needs. So that said, there's no specific number. There's no percentage that like you should increase by this much each week. Let your body be the guide. How did your workout go? How did your medium long run go? How did your long run go? That's where you should be taking notes in your diary, your journal, your running log. If you do it on Strava, use those things to, denote how to go. How did you feel? How did you recover? How did you feel the next day? Right. So note these things, and then that's what you base your growth off of. I feel like I could go a little bit further, and maybe that mileage comes in the medium long run and the long run, and you just slightly increase the volume on your, regular runs. But as I said, it doesn't necessarily need to be 10%. That's the message here. Also, what we're seeing now, we've always had this 80-20 rule, 80% of your training volume should be zone 3 or 5 RPE or less. Okay. Whereas 20% can be harder. That's 20% should be the intensity in your week, your workout, your strides, whatever it may be in a higher intensity level. That said, when you look at it, okay, that's a great way to divvy up your training. We're going to start hearing there's new science that's showing potentially it's 70-30. Again, point being, if you stick to that 80-20 rule, you're in a good, I'm sorry if you can hear Miles, you're in a good place. Okay. So know that 80-20 split it's a good place to know your training, at volume. Okay. The other piece that I want to make sure that I stress in training, we've gotten this handed down, this 3 weeks up and 1 week down. And I've talked about this in the podcast in the past. There is no cycle of the body in running that says you need to go 3 weeks up and 1 week down. Yes, our body does well when we allow it recovery, but it's not necessarily 3 weeks. Okay. It's a safe rule of thumb, just like the 10% rule. So, so we can keep building and keep growing and keep getting better. I'm not saying you shouldn't have down weeks, but you don't have to follow that 3 weeks up, 1 week down schedule. Okay. That, as I heard on Jason Koop's podcast, actually came from how athletes who used anabolic steroids, that was their cycle. They would juice for 3 weeks and then go off for 1 week. And that's how they grew and cycled. So it's not something that's specific to running, once again. So if you're following that and it's working, that's okay. I'm not saying it's the wrong thing. I'm just saying, some people can go a little bit more. They can go 4 weeks, potentially 5 weeks, and then take a recovery week. Again, listen to your body. What is it telling you? Listen to the signs of it. Does it need recovery? Can you keep growing, or does it need the recovery week? Okay. So just know. All right. Now I get into Kathleen's question, fitting it all in. Okay. And not feeling guilty if you can't. Well, it is difficult, right? A lot of us, we've got work, we've got kids, we've got activities, we've got a spouse, we've got, the house, we've got all these things we got to take care of. Trying to fit in all of these ancillary things, especially when the media is like, oh, you need to be doing, this much mobility. Oh, you should include this much strength training. Oh, you're never going to succeed unless you do this. There's so many things that the media are feeding us that these have to be incorporated in order for you to be a successful runner. Now, so how do you do it? How do you get it all in there? So my first thing is, I would say, and I did this the other day because I was feeling super tight. I was pretty sore. I'd had my first real good long run in a while with some good climbing, some good descending. And then I followed it with a really good kind of strength training. And it just really left me kind of tight. And, I didn't, my legs weren't, they weren't happy with me. I'll just say that. And so I knew I needed to work on mobility, and I still needed to get in some strength, but how was I going to fit that in? So I tried to incorporate movements that would work on not only my strength, but my mobility. Okay. I used a kettlebell. There's a lot of, you can use a lot of things around the house if you don't have a kettlebell to replicate it. A dumbbell. I mean, you could even use a jug, a water jug, whatever weight and whatever you have, use it in that regard. And there's a lot of movements using a kettlebell that can help. You can, get a lot of mobility from those movements. So it's, you can look up on YouTube. YouTube is a fantastic resource for that sort of thing. What are some good strength movements that will help me work on mobility in the hips, in the hamstrings, in the back? Okay. So you'll get some ideas, and then you just form a routine. And that's what I did. I just slapped together a bunch of movements that I knew would help me loosen those areas up. And it did. It worked to that effect. So I combined the strength and mobility into one routine, and it took me about 15 minutes, which I knocked out. Now, The other component that I will say about that, we feel a lot of times that if we do a strength session, okay, that we have to, just knock it out all at once. I mean, unless we're doing like a HIIT workout, a high intensity interval training workout, we don't need to. The reality is, if we do core or strength work, you can do it over the course of the day. Just fit it in when you can. What I like to do is I like to set a certain amount of athlete schedules that I'm going to work on, take a break, throw in a little bit of mobile board, where I'm working on my ankle, or plank or strength. So, I take these little breaks to kind of incorporate these things. Or I figure out a time where I'm like, okay, I know I can get this in, at this time and knock it out. But you can do it over the course of the day. That's my point. Okay. You don't have to do it all at once. So if you're feeling restricted by, I just don't have like this block of time, I do have like a minute here and there, use that minute here and there and just knock out some stuff. Okay. I had Jesse Fuller on here, and he did some great videos, and we talked about it on that podcast, where he just used the things that are around the house, as objects to help him do strength and mobility work. So again, use what you have in your environment to help you do a workout. Sometimes you have to be creative, but again, look around the house, look around YouTube, get some ideas, okay, and see what you can do and incorporate. Be creative with that. And I'll always say that whatever you're doing, it should not hamper your running, right? Like if you're having to get up super extra early and losing sleep just to fit it in, it might not be worth it. Sleep is always the quintessential. It is always the necessity for you. It should be your number one priority, because that's going to help you recover from your running. Since running is our number one priority, make sure sleep is a high priority. Okay. Don't sacrifice sleep just because you want to fit in the strength, fit it in some other way. So if strength training or, yoga or Pilates, if it's making you too tired, if you're getting too fatigued from those workouts, take a step back. Okay. Look at how much time you're doing it. Are you doing it for too long? Are you doing too many reps? Are you using too much weight? Okay. Can you decrease something to put you at a better level or a better energy level, I guess, to make you fresher for your running? Because we don't want it to diminish your running. If you're sore, yeah, you're going to be sore a little bit at first as you get used to lifting and strength again. But if it's constantly making you tired, like for 2 weeks, you're just, you're sluggish, you're probably doing either too much running and too much strength training, in which case I would take away some of the strength training first, diminish how much you're doing, and either diminish how many reps you're doing, how many sets you're doing, or how much weight you're doing. Okay. Or the combination of the three, or two of the three, however, you think will best make you a little bit more fresh in your run. If you've diminished and your running is still being sacrificed, you're still being tired or fatigued during your runs, you should look at how much running you're doing. And are you doing too much running? Should you diminish your running a little bit so that, you get your legs freshened up again? Okay. So be real conscious about your body and how it's reacting to these things. Okay. All right. So, Kathleen, I really hope that helps. Again, we're prioritizing the run. That's the big thing, right? I should add, I wanted to add back about the medium long run. So, I said there's 4 components. So the great thing about the medium long run is you can add strides to the end of that. So if you're really pinched for time and you don't know where in the week you're going to fit in your strides, add it to your medium long run. So now you've got 4 key components in 3 days. Okay. Makes it a little easier to incorporate. I like to keep the medium long run kind of separate from workout day, because I want the focus to be on increasing aerobic capacity. So keep the medium long run as just a medium long run. Don't incorporate a workout there, but you can add the strides to the end of that medium long run. Okay. That is okay. And actually a pretty good workout. So I hope that helps a lot. The otherwise, things that I'll say, again, just like strength training, it's not ideal to break up your running But if you have to, especially if it's just a regular run, you can split that in half. Let's say that you had 40 minutes for the day, but a 40-minute time period is tough to squeeze in, and you wanted to do a 20 and a 20, you can certainly break that up. Again, don't break up the medium long run or the long run. There's a specific purpose for the time on your feet, or stick to the duration for the medium long run and the long run. But if you have to, recovery runs can be split up. Regular runs can be split up. Sometimes you have to be creative about how you get in those things. But again, try to include those 4 components into each week. And if you have to, combine the strides in the medium long run. Okay. All right. I think that's all the points I had to cover for this podcast. If it brings up any questions or things you want me to do a deeper dive in, please, feel free to ask. Again, go back into my archives. I have a ton of information about the medium long run. I did an episode about strides and uphill strides. There's episodes about lactate threshold intervals, max VO2 intervals. Dive back into my archives and listen to those. And again, if those bring up questions or prompt you to want to know more about training, just ask. Happy to touch on some points again, or go deeper dive into other points. So just let me know. As far as everything that's going on around here, the January newsletter is out. So if you haven't had a chance, you can go onto my website under the contact or connect with me page. There's a link at the bottom for newsletters, and you can click on that, and all of my previous newsletters are archived on that page. You can also subscribe to the newsletter on mrrunningpains.com. There's a link for that. It is a free monthly publication in which I describe a lot of stuff. I do shoe reviews, gear reviews. I talk about different songs that I add to playlists, nutrition reviews at times, videos, podcasts that I've seen or I think are valuable. I do articles on training. There's just a ton of stuff that I try to put in there. So hopefully I make it worth your while. Once again, I want to thank everybody for their donations to both the Vermont Adaptive and the Challenged Athlete. And I hope we can continue to raise funds. I'm going to continue to include those links in the show notes to continue to raise money for those athletes. I want to congratulate Andrew Allen Dogan, a good friend from actually back in high school. He donated to the Vermont Adaptive, and he won the contest for 6 months of free coaching. So I want to say congratulations to him and thank him for his donation. So again, please, if you can, donate to one of those 2 foundations. It really does go to a great cause. These challenged athletes, disabled athletes, visually impaired athletes, a number of different athletes that may not think that they have the opportunity to do sports. And these 2 organizations try to make that a reality for all of these amazing athletes. So please, if you can, donate. I sincerely appreciate that. As always, thank you to my Patreon supporters. I mentioned them. I am doing every other week a special podcast for my Patreon supporters. I go deep dive into certain topics. Perhaps they have some things they want me to talk on. If you can donate, I sincerely appreciate that. Links are in the show notes as well. Anything else? Coaching. Oh my gosh. I'm really, I think I'm stretched. I'm at capacity for athletes that I can take on. If you've already contacted me and are looking to receive coaching in the near future, you're fine, but I don't think I can take on any more athletes at this time. I am, I'm gracious for the amount of athletes and the people that have come on board within the past month. It has been an overwhelming response to, my putting out there that I have coaching spots available. So, usually it's springtime after spring marathons. I usually have a few spots open. So if you're looking for something in the future, potentially in the fall or something, you should probably reach out to me and just kind of hold your spot, because like I said, it's great to be in popular demand. I'm very happy about that, and I appreciate everybody's support. And once again, I appreciate your support through this podcast. all the questions. Kathleen, thank you again for these questions. I'm sure if I didn't touch on something and you have a more specific question, by all means, just fire me a message. Same goes to all of you. My contacts, social media, everything is in the show notes. So don't hesitate to reach out, especially if you want to hear from somebody or a specific topic that I'm happy to talk about. I do have plans for multiple guests. I'm just trying to line them up. Obviously, we just went through the holidays. Very tough to line up guests during that time. So stay tuned for hopefully some great topics, some great conversations. Going to have some video podcasts again. So I'm looking forward to those. A lot of things in the works. So stay tuned for all of that. So once again, thank you so much for your support. Thanks for being a part of this podcast. Thank you for your time and your energies. And I wish you the best in your running. Until I talk to you next time, my friends, keep running.